Hi, I'm here to read another chapter of Witch on the Warpath, and last chapter we left Hearty sitting in an oak tree watching a watcher, which is a fairy midwife, waiting for the parents to arrive of her baby. Let's see what happens in this chapter. Chapter 27, Far Sight. 20 minutes passed, then, from between the railings, peeked two smiling faces. Together, two fairies fluttered down the other side to land beside their new son. Hearty smiled, enjoying their pleasure, but feeling a bit like he was intruding on an intimate moment. It didn't stop him looking, though. He wondered what being a parent felt like. The female cradled the tiny cocoon in her arms, while the male held her and touched the cocoon too. Together, the four of them watched as the cocoon dissolved and their son was born. The couple hugged him close, his mother kissing her son on the brow. Hearty could hear the infant expressing its need for food using the classic Dunstan "n" sound. Hearty surprised himself. He'd forgotten how much he knew about child development. He'd read lots in preparation for writing for human children. The new parents flew away through the trees after giving the watcher their son's name, Courage. A good choice, Hearty thought. The smiling watcher watched his new parents leave, satisfied in the knowledge he'd assisted another delivery. Another infant was safe. Turning to leave, he looked in Hearty's direction, lifted his hat, and gave a deep bow, then floated away into the darkening night sky. Hearty sighed. It had been a special moment, one he'd never witnessed before. Imagine, a newborn child, he thought. I wonder if it would be possible for me one day. He shook his head in sad dismissal. Hearing a sound below, he looked down through the branches to see Shine lying on her belly on the grass. Her chin was resting on her exquisite hands. Her face was composed and serious. Hearty realised the watcher had lifted his hat to Shine. It was clear she had witnessed the birth of a new life too, and now lay deep in thought. Shine was imagining a child of her own. She sighed, thinking of the family she might never have. Gristle left Lenny for dead. She was livid when they'd arrived in Canterbury City late in the afternoon. There was no sign of the blasted troll or her wretched fairy infant. The sky turned black over the city. It rained like it hadn't rained since 1953 for days on end. The lower Great Stour River burst its bank for the first time in decades. People ran for cover as hailstones the size of quail's eggs fell out of a storm-tossed sky. Tiles slid off the roof, chimneys tumbled from on high, crashing onto the earth with the force of an alpine avalanche. Trees bent to the ground, the weight of water running off their branches almost equivalent to their own weight. The rabbit population increased threefold, and a large flock of Aylesbury ducks appeared on the St Lawrence cricket pitch, where moments before white-clad Sunday cricketers were casting leather to willow. The last time the Kent County ground had seen such turbulence was in 2005, after a lime tree elf angered a witch. Violet the Vicious had retaliated by tearing his beautiful home out by the roots. Human reports at the time put the lime tree's demise down to old age and high winds. Lenny survived Gristle's wrath because he was invisible. The spell cast to throttle him was less effective as a result. Instead of strangling him, the spell struck his body, bound him from head to toe in knotted invisible rope, then slid sideways, launching off into the surrounding community. "Most bizarre," mumbled Lenny from inside a mountain of hemp. The spell had somehow mutated as it spread, and 2 puddles of frog spawn appeared on the grass where before 2 fallow deer grazed. The remainder of the herd, panicking, ran forwards straight into the line of fire, transmuting into frog spawn as they reached the struggling Lenny. Already unable to move because of the invisible rope, one advantage of being covered in thousands of ripening unborn frogs was Lenny became visible. At least his outline did. The congealed mess dripping onto the ground soon attracted the attention of a passing grey heron who took pity on Lenny. After eating a hearty pre-froggy meal, the heron reported Lenny's predicament to the local elf service, Nunnery Fields branch. The National Elf Service was a neighbourhood police and rescue force. Volunteers were entrusted to watch over residents within their patch. Their role was to defuse difficult situations and report active spell situations, ASSES, to the FC, for the idiot crew to come along and sort out. Releasing Lenny and removing the remaining spawn took the crew several hours, during which time Lenny, enjoying his newfound visibility, became very chatty. He informed the crew about Gristle's heinous plan to abduct and kill the unborn infant. "She's evil, she is," Lenny announced to the crew, grappling with the horrendous knots. "These knots, they aren't normal knots, are they?" he asked, staring down at the enchanted rope. The crew shook their heads. They'd seen spelled knots before. They couldn't tell Lenny the outcome of their last case of cursed rope, for fear of petrifying him. Turning to stone wouldn't help Lenny's situation. A carrier raven was sent to the regional FC in Ashford by the local elf service team coordinator. Their first priority was, of course, to hold a team meeting to discuss relevant policies and the price of string, along with the ASS guidelines and productivity modules. Leaving puddles of frog spawn like a trail of wet spotty breadcrumbs in her wake, Gristle stomped northwards. As she stamped, her mind hatched a new plan. "That stupid troll is going to rue the day he crossed me. Force me to ride for 17 hours on an old hag, would he? I'll show him. I shall fry him alive for this and grab the blasted fairy too," Gristle vowed. "If the idiot hasn't eaten it yet," she grumbled. Gristle's plan wasn't the only thing hatching that day. Millions of tadpoles emerged into the bright sunlight without fresh water to live. The local elf service were busy for many more hours rescuing the poor wriggly mites, transferring them to water. Gristle decided a visit to the local Pilgrim's Way witch, a crony of hers, was in order. She had high hopes of learning where Onk had gone since he left Canterbury from the witch who lived there. Maddie Grew the Gruesome, or Grew as she preferred, people only called her Mad from a distance, was a visionary. She'd been a major disappointment to her parents, who were head witch and grand wizard of Howfield Woods, and as such had some standing in the East Kent community. Gru had displayed dilute witching powers as a child. She couldn't stir a love potion without curdling it in witches' school. Despite this disappointing start, Gru managed to turn things around to a point where she was now feared by the majority of Kentish witches. At the age of 13 and puberty, Gru came into an awesome power. She developed an amazing natural talent unheard of in the witching world. Gristle felt sure Gru, a distant cousin 13 times removed, would be able to assist her in her current hunt, for Gru possessed the gift of farsight. Farsight was a rare ability, and for the most part folks disregarded it. That is, right up to the point where one of them became its victim. The capacity to locate anyone or anything could provide a person with tremendous political clout. You could find out what your rivals were up to, be on top with hunts or quests, or listen in to private conversations. Gristle would have killed to have held such a gift, if she could. It would mean giving up her spells and hexes, because a mature cast-in witch couldn't farsee, according to Gru, unless she relinquished all magical ability. Gristle wasn't that desperate, given what she'd seen of Gru's frugal lifestyle compared to her own. Though she didn't have magic, Gru considered herself a bona fide witch, no matter what others said. At least she could fly on a broomstick. Gru was a snippet of a thing for a witch, a mere 109 years old, as opposed to Gristle's antiquity. Her lunacy wasn't in the same lethal category as Gristle either. What Gru lacked in age and spells, she made up for in other ways. Her classic beauty was envied by many. She owned the approved number of appendages, 12 fingers and 12 toes. Plus she sported a gnarly assortment of warts and pimples, and had a fabulous weeping abscess over her hairy monobrow. Its continuous weeping resulted in a slimy green trail down her left cheek, and culminated in a stalactite hanging off the left side of her jaw. Amongst witches, it was a well-known fact that the uglier the witch's visage, the more powerful the individual. This so-called fact was actually a myth, invented by an extremely hideous witch desiring friends and power. There were hundreds of these erroneous old wives' tales, all said to gain the upper hand in the respect stakes, like those told by well-meaning relatives to new mothers to display their superior knowledge of parentcraft. For example, tickle a baby's feet and he'll develop a stammer by cockcrow. Or, head lice will only accrue on children with clean heads. The latter was said to make parents feel better when their child caught itchy head lice. Gristle had a rough idea where Gru lived. Leaving Lenny behind in mind and body, she journeyed on alone through Harbledown and the outskirts of the city towards Hall Place. In days long gone, Hall Place experienced life as a mansion built by a wealthy business family. Now owned by Kent University, renovated and extended, it relished its new life as a designated business training centre. Unknown to the maintenance team, Gru had made her home in the grounds of Hall Place, next to the small wood. The entrance to her hovel was disguised as a shed at the back end of the business centre's lower car park. Behind the shed, a wild flower meadow ran up on a steep gradient. The meadow ended at a high ridge where a row of human houses stared back down at the car park. Underneath the meadow, Gru's home extended for hundreds of yards. It twisted this way and that, its escape exit for times of trouble situated inside the small strip of woodland. Gristle found Gru's precise address by asking, aka torturing, magic folk along her route. A couple of hedgerow imps died from Gristle's interrogation. The imps, tiny weeny little creatures no bigger than a moth, who lived on wheat and snails, couldn't cope with such a formidable foe. A few poor souls who survived the initial ordeal of speaking to Gristle experienced seizures, dying later in the night. Of those that survived the event, none wanted to remember the evil witch. They submerged the episode deep inside their psyche, never to surface again. These traumatized individuals developed nervous tics and stutters, which remained until their fragile bodies descended onto the spiritual plane, or they moved to Bournemouth to live. "Old woman, are you in there?" called Gristle from outside the camouflage shack. The term old was a huge compliment to a young witch like Maddie Gru. Gristle waited a moment and was rewarded with an answering croak from its inhabitant. "Who wants to know?" came the withered reply from within. "It is I, Gristle, as well you know, or you're not Maddie Gru the Gruesome I thought you were. I'll take my custom elsewhere." Gristle turned as if to leave. "Wait!" called the disembodied voice. "I'll come out." It was a huge honour that Gristle had chosen to visit Gru in person. It inferred an important status that an older, more regarded witch was calling on a subordinate. Gristle waited, tapping her right foot with uppityness, outside Gru's subterranean home. Gru took her time making an appearance. Making Gristle wait increased her standing in the community, but it didn't improve Gristle's patience. One solitary thrush sang in the uppermost branches of an old horse-chestnut tree. He sang about his true love as if his heart would burst. So sweet, so pure was his voice, the song carried for miles on the windless evening air. Other birds had long gone to roost. The thrush sang his vigil, scouring the skies for his heart's desire, who'd passed away 2 days ago. His sadness and loneliness were tangible. His voice soared into the ether, reaching for his deceased mate's spirit. Gristle glanced up at the sad bird. The grieving thrush went to join his soulmate. The only evidence he'd ever existed was a small handful of downy breast feathers fluttering down to rest on the carpet of autumn leaves at her feet. Gristle detested birds. Woodland creatures witnessing this act of pure malice scattered at the sight of Gristle's despicable deed. Word spread that evil walked, and its shape was witch-like. That's where we'll leave it today. Join me next time on Witch on the Warpath. Goodbye. Hozzle, 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 stop it, hozzle.